Today on Justice for All.
And I think what you see now with the rise of this woke ideology is an attempt to really delegitimize our history and to delegitimize our institutions. And I view the wokeness as a form of cultural Marxism. It violates Florida standards to scapegoat someone based on their race, to say that they're inherently racist, to say that they're an oppressor or oppressed or any of that. And that's good and that's important. But we also have to realize that we got to do more to make sure that that actually carries the day in the classrooms and in our society. So today we are going to be introducing to the public, and we have legislators who are going to help us with this, a new piece of legislation for the upcoming legislative session called Stop Wrongs Against Our Kids and Employees Act, the Stop Woke Act.
Effective July 1st, the Stop Woke Act that you just heard Governor Ron DeSantis talking about will become law in Florida, making our state the first in the nation to officially regulate how schools and employers can talk about race and gender. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Tammy Fields. There is a lot to talk about in regards to this law, and we have invited a number of guests to help us do just that. Joining me today is Matthew Kincaid. He is the founder and the CEO of Overcoming Racism. Also joining us is Bernie Jacques, former prosecutor and conservative activist. We want to thank you both for your time with us today. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
So this first question is of Bernie. Shortly after this bill was signed into law, a lawsuit was filed pushing back against the Stop Woke Act. In fact, it's also known as HB 7. In it now, the plaintiffs allege that the new law violates the First Amendment. Your thoughts?
Right. It's not surprising that a lawsuit came out immediately after. In fact, I think they were going to sue regardless. The lawsuits were ready, whether it was signed before it was signed and certainly after it was signed, it came out. So regarding a First Amendment issue, there's not a First Amendment issue here, especially when it comes to the schools. And when it comes to the schools, and we have K through 12 education that is compulsory here in the state of Florida. And so what that means is the students are a captive audience. And so they don't have a choice as to whether or not they are not subjected to this ideology that is being pushed down in the curriculum in our classrooms. And so it's not an issue of a First Amendment issue. It simply says that we need to get back to real education instead of indoctrination in our schools. And even in the workplace context, right? No one should have to choose between being subjected to an ideology saying they're either oppressed or an oppressor, and have to choose between that and their paycheck. So I don't see the First Amendment issue here. In fact, the law actually says you can have these discussions, just not in a way that violates civil rights standards that the state has, meaning categorizing people, individuals, as just groups, as you're either victim or you're an oppressor. And that's what this law is trying to achieve. And so there's not an attack on speech. It's just an attack on a radical indoctrination and getting back to just basic education or just productive conversations in the workplace, and not those that makes individuals feel as if they have something to apologize for or to feel guilty about things they have nothing to do with.
Matthew, let's bring you in on this part of the conversation. What are your thoughts on this legislation and everything that Bernie has said as of right now?
Yeah, really great question. As an educator myself, I taught 7th and 8th grade social studies for a number of years in New Orleans. This is really disheartening to see a state institution pass regulation that impacts teachers' ability to speak on and address very real issues of race, and also just more broadly, any dynamic that comes up in the important discourse that our students have to engage in schools. Schools aren't just places that impact knowledge. They're also places that teach our students how to exist in our diverse society. And so what we need is more conversations about a broader set of ideologies, a broader set of topics, so that students can agree and disagree and become critical thinkers. Policies like this are, one, of course, violation of the First Amendment, but also anti-American, this notion that we should limit what can and cannot be said in classrooms because perhaps that particular topic may make one group or another group of people uncomfortable. I think my main issue, though, with the comments prior to this is that people keep talking about what's happening in schools. I spend in schools. I spend most of my time in schools. I was a teacher in schools. I was a school administrator in schools. I've seen none of this that people are alleging is happening, or very little of it happening in schools. And so I guess my main question is, what was the antecedent that this is supposedly such a big issue that we passed a law about it? We know about real issues in schools like disparities in achievement between groups of student of color and white students. We could pass laws to address that. We're not addressing that. We're supposedly passing a law to address this boogeyman of critical race theory, but I've yet to see evidence of where this is showing up in schools and the data around what the impact on kids has been.
Let's ask Bernie that question, because we've reported here on several occasions that critical race theory is not taught at all and has not been taught, Bernie, in K through 12. What's your reaction to what Matthew is saying? The question he's asking, it's a valid one.
It's inaccurate. So here's the issue. During the pandemic, when a lot of students were engaged in remote learning, one of the silver linings of the pandemic, I guess you can say, is that parents were able to see what their kids were learning at school. And they were definitely seeing these classroom exercises and activities, looking at everything through the prism of race, right? This race first instead of character first approach of saying that if you happen to be of a minority group, somehow the system is stacked, the chips are stacked against you, the system is against you, and if you happen to be white, somehow there's a privilege that you have to check. Let's not pretend that's not happening in none of our classrooms. And in fact, if you watch the governor's press conference when he signed the Stop Woke Act, we heard from families and students as far as what was going on in their classrooms and what they were and how appalled they were. And not just from white families and white students who were basically being called racist just because of the way they look, but you heard from black mothers who were saying that they will not stand silently aside as their kids are being called victim, as if they can't achieve anything in this country. It's very degrading. So this is an issue. So, and to your point, there's not going to be a textbook in the schools. You're going to find that's CRT 101, critical race theory, but the instructions are there, especially when you have this talk about equity. Usually it's a buzzword for exactly what we're describing. You know, we've gone from just equality of opportunities, equality before the law, equality as far as treatment, to this thing of equity, which basically means settling the score. And it's why you're seeing black-only graduations, because somehow that's social and racial justice. It's why you're seeing things like getting rid of certain standardized testing, because somehow math is racist. And so this is absolutely happening. And for the critics who claim that it's not happening, if it's not happening, why so resistant to it?
We need to pause for just a moment, and when we come back, we're also going to take a look at how this new law could have an impact directly on businesses. Joining our panel next is going to be the CEO of a Florida-based wedding registry company. Her name is Sarah Margolis, and she says that she will not be making any changes to the way her business addresses diversity in the workplace. We'll get her take and more from Matthew as well when Justice for All returns. Welcome back to Justice for All. Today's topic of discussion, one of Florida's newest laws set to take effect, the Stop Woke Act. And joining us, our panel right now, Sarah Margolis. She is the CEO and the co-founder of Honey Fund. It is a Florida-based wedding registry company. Sarah, thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
I am curious to find out what's your take on the Stop Woke Act. This is playing out for companies statewide, and many do in fact believe that employers should simply shy away from holding diversity trainings or workshops, really out of fear of violating the Woke Act. What are your thoughts?
So when Honey Fund moved from California to Florida in 2017 to take advantage of a lot of benefits of being a business running in Florida. And I know that there's a lot of effort and money and campaigning that goes on to get more businesses into Florida. And so I think it's really important for us to talk about how does this impact a business that maybe has come to Florida or thinking of coming to Florida and that values diversity in its workplace and as a culture of our company. And for me, I feel like, you know, learning about institutional racism is important for everyone in our country and our children in school, absolutely. putting a spin on it that, we all have to walk around with guilt, I don't agree with that. But I do feel like we can't shy away from the education for fear that people might feel bad, because it does feel bad to learn what institutional racism is. It does feel bad to know that there's a whole class of people in our country that never got to build wealth and pass on homes to their children and savings accounts and inheritances. That's a terrible thing to understand. And it does make us feel bad, but at the same time, we have to choose to be part of a way forward where we help people help everyone build wealth and, the American dream. And as a business owner, I feel a responsibility to do that.
So how do you do this without violating the law? And is it going to be difficult for you going forward?
For us, I think it's not going to change the way that we educate our employees about issues of race, but I think it will, we will have to spend time and money engaging our lawyers to understand where are we going to potentially be violating this. We're going to have to be worrying about being sued by the state of Florida or our employees, if we have a slight misstep. And I don't think that's the culture that Florida wants for businesses. It seems like there's some kind of disconnect here between the goals of the state when it comes to businesses and the goals when it comes to politics.
Matthew, I know one of your goals of your organization, Overcoming Racism, is to actually work with companies on this topic, establishing race and equity training. How does this affect your ability to do what you do?
I mean, the state of Florida has effectively made it illegal for us to work in the state. So, as I said before, obviously a very clear violation of our First Amendment rights, but also just private industry's ability to determine what they believe is important for their employees to know in order to do their job effectively. What's really fascinating is that this is perhaps, like in terms of conservative ideology, one of the most anti-conservative bills, but it does serve a particular political purpose. And so businesses and corporations don't necessarily bring me in out of the goodness of their heart. Yes, anti-racism is a moral priority, but this is also just a best practice. McKinsey determines that more diverse companies and companies who are able to actualize that diversity by building racially harmonious environments have better financial impact, have a better bottom line. Forbes and Harvard Business School goes further to say that more diverse companies and companies that engage in these types of training are more innovative, better at problem solving, better at engaging in a diverse client base. So when you tell a corporation that they cannot bring someone in to do diversity or anti-racism training, you're also speaking directly about a business's intrinsic ability to do well in their workplace and in their industry. And so I wish and I hope one day that we get to a point where we all view anti-racism, which let's define that, being against racism, we should all agree that that's a good thing, that we view that as a moral priority, but companies aren't bringing us in for a moral priority. Disney isn't doing this work because Disney wants to be the most quote unquote woke company. They're doing it because they're a successful company and that these types of trainings helps to contribute to that success. And much of what was said in the earlier segment about what CRT is, about what these workshops are, could not be further from the reality of what's actually happening in these spaces as a person who leads these conversations daily. And so you make up a boogeyman, you create a policy that's against that boogeyman, and you then end up impacting people like myself, who's not directly teaching critical race theory, from even coming into the state that work for everybody.
All right, Bernie, it's your time. You've heard from our two guests here who are saying this kind of training is helpful and also helps the bottom line. You say what? This is Florida. It's supposed to be what we hear the governor say from time to time, a free state. Why this law?
Yes, Florida is a free state, and that means we must be free from radical ideologies being imposed upon. In many cases where corporations have gone way too far. You had Coca-Cola telling their employees to be less white. I mean, what the heck does that mean? Disney, to bring it closer to home, was telling their employees to check their white privilege. These are the type of things that violates basic civil rights ethos. It used to be that you treated people based on the content of their character, as individuals, which is what the civil rights movement was fought for. And now we're going back to a place where we're categorizing people based on race and making huge assumptions about them, even at the workplace. And so these type of things is what needs to be challenged, because it does have an impact on the workplace when somebody feels as if they're being, in essence, discriminated against. It seems to be, and that's what we see with the woke ideology, right? There seems to be a built-in virtue in being a minority, but if you happen to be white or male, it's somehow inherently to be looked and frowned upon. So it's okay to be basically where you have anti-white racism and or discrimination, where somebody would be left out of a position because in the name of equity, it becomes an issue. And so no one is saying you can't talk about diversity in the workplace. What the law is saying is that if somebody is subjective, these trainees are subjecting your employees based on, it lists 8 specific things. And I'll list a few of them. One of them is that an individual's moral character or status as either privileged or oppressed is necessarily determined by his or her race, color, sex, or national origin. It also prohibits telling an individual that by virtue of his race or her race that they can be discriminated against and receive adverse treatment to achieve diversity, equity, and inclusion. And one of the ones as well is very powerful, is that it precludes an individual, saying that an individual by virtue of their race, color, sex, or national origin, that they bear personal responsibility for and must feel guilty, anguish, and other forms of psychological distress because of actions which the individual played no part in or committed in the past, just because members of the same race had committed these things.
Bernie,
these are the things we're fighting against. It's discriminatory. It's flat out discriminatory.
Bernie, let's get Sarah's take on this. You've heard what Bernie had to say about making other people feel guilty and feel badly. What's your take on that?
I'm going to give you a really practical application of this that happened in my company, and I'm glad that Bernie mentioned the idea that being male is a privilege, because I do a lot to advance women in business, and this is a project that I'm very passionate about. I had an employee who would literally ask the woman on the call to take notes every time, and there was no reason by virtue of his role or her role that she should be the note taker in the meeting. And so I literally had to have a conversation with that employee about, checking that. And I think that that's sometimes what you have to do, is have those tough conversations with your employees when you see that playing out in the workplace. No Florida law is going to stop me from checking that in my company.
All right.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a situation with an individual, but the issue that the law is trying to address is that you would categorize all the men in your company and say, hey, you have something to check. No, you check the individual who had poor conduct, and that's the point. We want to get back to treating people as individuals based on the content of their own merits and character, and not just categorizing broad strokes of that you must be privileged or you must be oppressed just because of the way you look. We need to get away from that.
All right, we'll have to stop right there. We absolutely have to take a break. I'm sorry, Matthew. Matthew's raring to go. Stand by. I promise I'll get to you. We have to take one more quick break. When we come back, we're going to examine the impact that this law could have on our schools. I know that is something Matthew wants to talk about too. Justice for All returns in just a few minutes. Welcome back to Justice for All. We have been talking about the Stop Woke Act, one of Florida's newest laws set to take effect on July 1st. I want to thank our panel today for being here with us, for their time on this important topic. We spent some time in our last segments discussing the impact that this law could have on employees and employers, but the name of this legislation, it stands for Stop Wrongs Against Our Kids and Employees Act, which means our children could also be impacted. Matthew, I want to start back with you because I know you wanted to jump in here and address some of the last few comments.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first thing is a lot of what was cited in terms of what the law says is also in alignment with most anti-racism education. One of the things that we say directly in every single workshop that we engage with is guilt is immobilizing. There's no reason to position racism as a debate or conversation between me and another individual, when instead we're talking about structures which should support people in order to, decouple themselves from that. I think a lot of the rhetoric that these conversations are about white people feeling bad or about one person being the oppressor and another person being the oppressed is actually antithetical both to CRT and the way that diversity trainings are happening across this country as a professional who does it every single day. It would be almost like, me driving up to a gas station and seeing that the gas prices at that gas station were higher than I paid last year. And then, picketing outside that gas station and saying, you're an evil gas station. I can't believe your gas prices are higher. Well, the reason why those gas prices are higher are also connected to a bunch of other structural elements that I should be aware of if I want to understand why gas prices are rising across this country. We can have a structural analysis about anything else. But if we want to have a structural analysis about race in a country and in states that have passed laws and policies to say a few enslaved, genocided, medically experimented, we cannot pretend like these issues have not happened historically and that we don't have the tools to address them today. Now, in terms of students, because this is the place where most of my work starts, as the genesis of my work as an educator, there are real issues that are happening in schools that we need to address, that parents are concerned about. Discipline disparities, the fact that Black children are 4 times more likely to be suspended in schools than a white child for the same infraction. The fact that teacher preparedness is one of the best indicators of student success, in that Black children are 60% more likely to be in a classroom with an uncertified teacher and twice as likely to be in a classroom with a first-year teacher. The fact that boys make up a vast majority of suspensions in schools, but Black girls are suspended at a higher rate than white boys. I could go on down academic disparities. I could talk about graduation-based disparities. There are real issues that parents have been talking about for generations in schools.
Let's jump in right here. Let's jump in and let Sarah jump in because she's nodding her head. Was there a comment that you wanted to make about this?
Yeah, I 100% agree that the ability to talk about this at a systems level is a really great way to wrap this into a nutshell, and why I feel like it's so important for a company to be able to educate its employees about how these systems have impacted where we are today as a society and how we can be a little bit more aware of those things and work together more in the workplace. If the more compassion and sympathy I have for my coworkers, the more I can understand where they're coming from, the more I can take their feedback and their input and put it to good use for the business, and it comes down to the bottom line. And so I think that this act, which seems to be mostly a political posturing, isn't really truly helpful for businesses, and we have to be able to move forward as a society when it comes to racial topics and not try to shut down the conversation.
Bernie, you get the final word. You're shaking your head here in disagreement. You say what?
Right. No conversation is being shut down. In fact, it's already instituted in Florida law to teach real history, right? So students, and the Stop Woke Act even emphasizes that. We have to teach about slavery. That's in the law. We have to teach about the Jim Crow era. We have to teach about the Holocaust. We have to teach about the Civil Rights Movement. All of those are historical realities. The prohibition is against putting your own ideology, your own ideological spin on historical events to indoctrinate students, and that is wrong. We need to be teaching individuals that they control their destiny, they can work hard and make it in this country, and that our founding documents made that very possible here in the United States.
And Bernie,
this is a great country, and we don't need to be divided, hating each other and hating our country. That is totally wrong.
And Bernie, what do you say to educators, many of whom we have interviewed, who say they are already doing that and were doing that before the Stop Woke Act?
Well, if they were doing that, as far as telling children they can be all that they can be, I applaud them. But when we have certain circumstances that's grouping children and telling them, hey, because you happen to be a minority, you have this, that, and the other going against you, it almost becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, and children automatically start feeling sorry for themselves. And then you imagine being a poor white kid who didn't come from privilege, and automatically you have to think that you're somehow have an edge or an advantage over somebody just because of the color of your skin when you have a hard life. I mean, this is wrong. Treat people based on their individuals. There are white kids who have a hard time, who've had a hard life. There are Black kids who are economically privileged, even more so than their white counterparts. So why are we grouping people and making people have resentment? This whole movement comes out of a place of bitterness and resentment and division. And the governor is correct. It is a form of cultural Marxism. And I don't think it has any place in our workplace or in schools.
Bernie, thank you very much. And I appreciate your perspective. Sarah, thank you. Matthew, thank you as well. I know that you're sitting on your hands and you want to say more, but we are out of time. But we thank each of you. Thank you very much. And thank you at home for watching. We appreciate you as well. Until next time, stay safe and stay informed.